Okay, we've got top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still joining. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and welcome. My name is Anthony Adorno with DeGarmo, joined by my colleague, Chad Carlisle, Robin Quartz, and Dominic Adorno as our panelists for today's session. I'll get to their introductions in just a couple of minutes. For those of you who were not able to attend the inaugural talent leader session that we had in February, so if this is your first session, our goal for these are to tackle different issues relative to talent leadership within the OPO community, and to provide an opportunity to share tips, strategies, best practices from leaders in this space. And so we'll host these on a bi-monthly basis. Again, just an opportunity to learn from each other how things can be done better, or come up with different ideas for operationalizing different initiatives in your field space. So we're going to be tackling the concept of building a deep bench around donor advocates, and I'll get into that in just a few minutes, kind of why we landed on that topic and how we're going to explore it today. As part of this session, our panelists are going to be presented with a number of different questions they're going to respond to, but you'll also have the opportunity to engage with them. Chad is going to be fielding all of your questions using the Q&A dialogue at the top of your screen. So at any point during today's session, if you have any questions that you want the panelists to field, just type them in there. We're going to use some time at the end of the session to get to those questions. So we won't be doing them kind of in order or on demand, but rather kind of hold them at the end. Speaking of on demand, if yourself or any of your colleagues are ever unable to attend the Talent Leader Forum, or if your FSCs are unavailable to attend those bi-monthly forums, we always record them, and they can be available to you on demand to view at your convenience. So just let us know if that's a need that you have, and we can provide the necessary information to get connected. So on to today's topic. Last time we met in February, we kind of talked about this idea of separating the family services team really into two different roles, more of a support versus an advocacy role based on compatibility from the FSC. So those people who are going to be much more effective in leading conversations with families about donation, and those people who might function more effectively providing empathy and compassion and support for families going through a really trying time in their lives. And we learned a lot from our speakers then, and as Kim from LifeShare had shared, obviously there's some real benefits to separating the teams, but there's also some challenges too. And that's really what got us kind of thinking about this topic. And what I mean by those challenges are just kind of the scheduling demands, and really this concept of how many conversations is too many to have in a day, from a demand perspective. And so, kind of thought about how to maybe deepen that donor advocate bench and support people in that role by leveraging other folks that might be available in different functions. And so that's kind of where the concept started. And so we're going to address that issue, but we're also going to kind of revisit this notion of separating the teams and some of the work that is responsible managing that change as well. So they're separate but very much related ideas. And so our speakers today are going to share their experiences, both from managing the family services team and dividing those into two different roles and some of the impact there, as well as some of the strategy around, how to deepen the bench. What are we doing operationally to find talent that already exists within the organization and to prepare them to function effectively in an on-demand or as needed basis to support the donor advocacy conversations. So with us again today are Dominic Adorno and Robin Quartz. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then I'm going to transition to a little bit of an overview of what each of them is experiencing with respect to, to these separate but related issues. So Dominic, as executive director and president of Donor Connect, is dedicated to amplifying the organization's community impact, saving lives, and fostering staff growth and development. Prior to his role, Dominic served as vice president of clinical operations at Life Center Northwest, where he provided strategic leadership in organ and tissue donation operations across multiple states. Dominic's career in donation also includes serving as chief operating officer at Lions Vision Gift and holding various clinical and leadership positions at Donor Network West and Gift of Hope. Outside of work, Dominic enjoys giving back to the community through volunteer work with organizations such as Cancer Lifeline, where he served on the board of directors, and fundraising for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Dominic's also a proud veteran of the United States Navy. So welcome, Dominic. Also welcome Robin Quartz. After completing a degree in thanatology, Robin began her career in OPO work. She has been a frontline team member holding donation conversations for both organ and tissue, built aftercare programs, developed webinars and other learning opportunities, and eventually transitioned into a leadership role in 2023. Along the way, Robin obtained a fellow in thanatology through the Association for Death Education and Counseling, as well as returning to school for a second graduate degree in education. In her current role, Robin supports both the on-site and remote donation conversation teams at Iowa Donor Network. So welcome to our panelists. So we're going to start today with just kind of a high-level overview of kind of the vision that you each had and your organizations had as part of these kind of separate but connected initiatives. And so Dominic, I'm going to start with you. Give you just an opportunity to kind of contextualize the work that you guys are doing around deepening the bench and kind of the vision that you had prior to that work kicking off.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to join the panel. And I just want to start because I think it's helpful to give a little background of where Donor Connect came from. What was our journey before moving on with the DeGarmo project? So historically at Donor Connect, our clinical coordinators, who we call organ donation coordinators, led the donation conversations. And it was around 2018 where we started formalizing the family support coordinator role, and that was, aimed at leading donation conversations and supporting donor families through the donation process. And by 2021, the donation conversations were predominantly led by the FSC. So there so much that in the following years, there was a less of a priority on training the organ donation coordinators. Now, when I joined just a little over a year ago, there was a change in leadership on the family support team, and the manager who was part of the DeGarmo research project was no longer there. So I think really my role when I arrived at Donor Connect was really to help people understand what the project was. I think easing some concerns that I wasn't going to replace the whole team based on what we learned from the project. And really give Chad and the DeGarmo group an opportunity to do some coaching about what the project was and what we're trying to achieve. Now, fast forward a couple months, and I began doing a reorganization at Donor Connect, and where I moved the clinical, family, and HD teams under the same executive. I really think this is a benefit to have a single vision and a single point of accountability. We have a new director on the clinical side who the family team now reports to. There's such a synergy between those three teams. So I think having that single point of accountability and vision is critical to implementing projects like this. And I say all this to really just to kind of give a perspective on our readiness, or I would say our lack of readiness for change. That director of the family team is no longer with us. We recently promoted a new manager. So right now, our priority is really focused on building the infrastructure necessary to support this new vision, which includes thinking differently about the staff who are going to lead these donation conversations. And I think like most OPOs, we started transitioning to this designated family support coordinator role because it's critically important that we provide support and care to our donor families. And I think the assumption has been that because you have been trained to provide support families, that naturally you're going to be the best person to lead the donation conversations. And what we learned from this DeGarmo work is that that's not necessarily the case. You certainly may be effective at both roles, but doing that code switching is not readily, a skill set that people are able to have. So our goal and vision at Donor Connect is to separate the function of having donation and leading donation conversations from the role, and really to create a deeper bench of people who can lead these conversations. Now, we have a fairly large service area. So beyond just the number of conversations, which you alluded to earlier, Anthony, we're also thinking about how do we geographically uh, staff our service area to have more conversations. So some of our staff, they may continue to perform both functions in the roles that they're in. And we're going to have some other staff where we're going to have to rethink the alignment of the function and their role. So really what we're trying to do is find the right people to lead the donation conversations versus what's the right role. So that's where we're at now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And pardon me. Similarly, Robin, can you kind of contextualize the vision that Iowa Donor Network had as you kind of thought about this challenge of separating the roles for support and advocacy purposes?
Yes. Also, another thank you for having me as part of the panel. I attend all of these, and I'm usually feverishly taking notes. So today will feel like a weird break from that. But yeah, a high level overview. So it's kind of a two-part answer to this. So from a vision and goals perspective, something recognized was the need to reach more families, obviously offer more donation opportunities while increasing our authorization rates. And so for us, this meant honing in on the skills and individuals who excelled in that part of the role. Our organization, Iowa Donor Network, has often taken the approach of specializing in roles. So kind of throughout the organization, there are folks who are very, very specialized in the role that they do. So it really felt natural to sort of kind of look at this as a specialization. In this instance, creating a specialized approach role and then a specialized support role became the goal. Our logical next step was really just looking within the team to determine who would be the best supported in each role and where do their strengths and interests lie. So kind of dual serving. We want to make sure that the team member is still satisfied in their role as well, because obviously the performance is better when you're happy with your role. The second part of the vision and goal was really recognizing the importance of having someone to support the family that wasn't being pulled in different directions. So historically, I think a lot of OPOs and some OPOs now, you wear a lot of hats. You know, you're on site, you're doing HD, you're doing your approach, maybe you're calling the blood bank, like who knows, there's always different things you're asked to do. And something that we recognized was just that need for family-focused care, that once we've obtained authorization, we want to make sure this family has one-on-one support from our family advocate team. The issues that we had prior to making this separation, that person providing support might get pulled away to do an approach, because we know that approach is super time sensitive. We can't, hey, family, you have to wait. I'm over at this other hospital. So just recognizing that we wanted family-focused care. We wanted a family advocate who would be that on-site support and then also carry them through aftercare. So that was kind of their specialization. We just really want to make sure the hospitals also see that as well, that we are taking really good care of the families that we are having these conversations with. So just knowing that this is part of the role just to continue supporting these families. So the FA role is able to support the families, while the ODA or on-site donation advocate / approach role is able to focus and specialize in donation conversations. We also know that there's a benefit in frequent conversations. So knowing that our on-site donation advocates are having a higher number of donation conversations, we think obviously like kind of just helps with those skills and comfort in frequent donation conversations. And that is kind of our sort of overall vision and goal for the separation.
Great, thank you. So I think that's helpful contextual information for the audience to understand kind of where you'll each be coming from as we get into each of your topic areas. And from a cadence perspective, rather than kind of going back and forth between the separation of the the function or the role versus kind of the deepening of the bench, we're going to tackle each independently. So we're going to spend the first part of the second half of this conversation focused on deepening the bench. And so I'm going to ask Dominic a few questions, and then we're going to transition. I've got a few questions for Robin as well about the advocacy versus donation initiative. So I think one of the first questions that came to mind for me when this topic first came up is just, where do you look? Like you've got a big organization. How do you figure out where to spend your time trying to determine who might be effective at supporting this donation advocacy role on an on-demand or temporary basis? So how do you think about the organization in that regard and figure out who to include as part of the prospect area? And then what are you doing to identify those people and put yourself in a position to actually have potential for supplementary staff?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can say that I had a little bit of a advantage of being able to be a part of this project from the recruitment phase. So I had the opportunity to jump out alongside Chad and having conversations with OPOs about this project. And I learned a lot during those calls, and I learned that a lot of people had similar questions and were thinking, who are, if not these FSCs, then who? And anecdotally, I was hearing a lot of different perspectives and different outcomes of their own OPOs. I'd hear, wow, our hospital development team has the highest authorization rate, so this is really timely that you bring this up. One of the OPOs said, hey, we just recruited a barista from Starbucks and they're doing fantastic. And that really started making me think about who can have these conversations. And just personally, I wasn't formally trained in having conversations, and I really enjoyed it and felt like I did well. Certainly, you pair that with the results of the project, which really highlighted that RNs and respiratory therapists in that other section, right? So who's in that other section? So that really piqued my interest about kind of who can and should lead these conversations. We have something that we call the tripod at Donor Connect. That's our clinical teams, our family teams, and our hospital development teams. And I talked about the synergy that those groups have whenever there's initiatives going on at the hospital. So I really wanted to start there. So what we did first was give every team member in hospital development, all of our clinical coordinators, and any of the family support coordinators who weren't part of the project, that were newer staff, we gave them the assessment that everybody took as part of the project. And rather than just giving them an insight report, which DeGarmo provides, we said, let's pretend that these were all new hires. And with that comes a score, and it tells you if they're a weak match, a moderate match, or a strong match to the profile that was identified as, the donation advocates in a project. And at the time, we had 8 positions for family support, 7 of which were filled. So I said, all right, if we were to start all over, and now with these 35 plus clinical HD and family support teams, if we were going to say who are the highest 7 of them, the highest scoring, which roles would that be comprised of? And so, not surprisingly, or maybe not, of the 7, the 3 highest were in HD, clinical, and 1 was in the FSC role. So that kind of reinforced the takeaways from the project itself. So from there, we're like, okay, I think we certainly have the opportunity or already have a deep bench. So how do we really materialize that? So, we're looking internally at clinical positions, certainly our hospital development team as well. Also our tissue donation coordinators. So the staff that approach for tissue donation is separate. The remote staff, and they're very effective, and they have high authorization rates on the tissue side, which is all led via phone calls. The other, when I go back to the hospital development coordinators, roughly 80% of our donation activity incurs about 7-8 hospitals. This includes southern Idaho and southern Utah. So, areas that are not relatively close in proximity to the greater Salt Lake. So we are actively building these in-house coordinator roles at our key hospitals. And every one of these roles now have donation conversations as a part of their job descriptions. So in terms of how do we reach more families, have more conversations, we're looking to include these in-house coordinator roles who are primarily focused at one hospital, in addition to our family support coordinator. So that's one of the strategy ways that we're looking at deepening our bench.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like it's a major change initiative. It's not insignificant. And so how do you plan for kind of the infrastructure, the resource demands as a result of that change initiative? How do you know what you need to do to support it effectively?
Yeah, well, I think one of the very first things we did was really embed the DeGarmo assessment into our recruitment process. And the reason we chose our people and culture, which is our HR team, is because they're able to address potential applicants, but also we wanted them to be able to control the assessment flow for our internal candidates as well, or our internal staff, if we want to assess the tissue donation staff. So we built this recruitment flow into our applicant tracking system. So any new applicant who applies goes through a high-level screening from our people and culture team. They send it out to our hiring manager, who then decides whether they want to move them on to an interview. And at that point, they can send this applicant the DeGarmo process. So we really want to embed that into our workflow because we recognize that this was going to take some time to build. So in the meantime, we have open positions with our family support coordinator team. So we want to make sure that every new applicant was being screened by this DeGarmo assessment, right? So that we are only hiring strong matches. And if that wasn't an opportunity based on the applicant pool, that at least high moderate matches. So that was very critical. Is that let's start with the staff that we have to make sure that any open positions are being filled by people who are high moderate to strong matches. And then again, we can then think about internally who else do we want to have take the assessment. Now, one of the things is at Donor Connect is we have a fairly strong donation rate. So the urgency to make change is not as critical or high for us. We want to be really intentional about building this thing internally so it's effective. So like I said, every new family support coordinator position that's open takes this assessment, as well as these new in-house coordinators, which we call donation program coordinators. Every one of them is taking the assessment. So even though they're not speaking to families right now, in order to be successfully move on to interviews, you have to have a high moderate to strong match, even for our hospital development roles. As part of our fiscal year budget, so we're on a July to June budget, so the timing worked out really well. We are considering a dedicated training position for this family support role or this advocate role. So we don't have one currently. So there was training was predominantly driven by preceptors. So we recognize this will be a bigger lift to train people maybe who have not had any formalized training in supporting families and leading donation conversations. So we want to make sure that we have a dedicated resource to train people who are not, who may have other responsibilities as part of their primary role. And we're also considering hiring on a consultant as a bridge until we can have that training. So again, really thinking strategically about who can have the conversations, making sure that we are assessing them as part of their interview, building the team up, and then making sure that we have the resource behind it to train them. So again, part of what DeGarmo shows that it does take some time, some repetition, and then actually up to 3 years to be really confident and comfortable in this role. So we are thinking about this as a longer term build for us and try to do it more methodically up front.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So how are you thinking about kind of balancing continuity for support and high levels of of effectiveness and kind of managing those conversations with family members? Like how are you ensuring that there's not going to be a breakdown of what sounds to be a pretty successful operation right now, talking about kind of the donation rate? But I have other questions that came out of that. But I mean, just in terms of like maintaining this continuity and effectiveness and support, and what's the plan there? As you're thinking about supplementing your staff in this way.
Yeah, I always like to say we should be going slow before we go fast, right? So to me, it's like I want to start building the culture appropriately, making sure that everyone recognizes how critically important it is for both the roles, whether you're a family advocate or a donation advocate. I certainly think we have, because we are moving a little bit slower, we have the opportunity to learn from other OPOs like Robin and from Kim from LifeShare to recognize what they're going through when they've delineated the roles. And I, as part of my role at Life Center Northwest, I split the team into two different groups: a family support coordinator who is primarily focused on supporting families after authorization, and the family support specialist who was geared towards the conversation. Now, we didn't have the results, but we had a strong inclination that we wanted to hire medical social workers. That's what anecdotally our team wanted to go for. So we had the resources to go ahead and just do that. We don't have those ready right now at Donor Connect. So we're intentionally going slow and trying to learn from others along the way. And it's important to recognize that I think just because you are a strong match on the assessment doesn't necessarily translate or guarantee that you're going to be effective. And that's why I think we really want to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to support those new employees' development. So again, making sure they have the support and structure and prior to just flipping the switch and saying, this is now who's going to have the conversations. Making sure that we have the right resources to train to both aspects of it. So the family support, the family advocate piece, along with the donation advocate piece, and thinking we may want to redesign that training. If all of the training has been the way to support families and obtain authorization is through empathy and cooperation and all the things that were shown to be not correlated with strong or high authorization rates, we might need to rethink our training to talk about influence and those kinds of things. I want to focus on the integration between the two teams, although they may be separate in function and several of them may be function and role. I do think it's critically important to make sure that they are working together. There's this continuous feedback mechanisms for those two different positions or different roles, and really try to create a team one mentality. And I think one of the ways that we can work towards some continuity is through a deployment strategy, right? So our authorization rates on the registered DCDs are like 93%. We have 100% registered BrainNet conversation. So we may not need to take away the current staff, even though they might not have scored high on the assessment. They're still doing really well in those conversations. So we might want to think about a different deployment strategy where we're focused on our non-registered population with this group who were strong and matches on the DeGarmo assessment. And again, cross-training any way we can, recognizing we have a big geography, making sure that those who are geared towards the donation advocate along the way as part of career ladder development, they can also cross-train to the support function as well. So those are the ways I think we're trying to think about continuity, recognizing we don't know what we don't know. But fortunately, through these forums and through people's other experience, we can learn what they're doing and hopefully be able to continue to improve that process along the way.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, hopefully this becomes one resource for that information and experience sharing that people can learn from for their own experience. Thank you. I found that really interesting, and I've got some follow-up questions, but I'll allow audience questions first before I ask all of my follow-ups. I want to transition to Robin. I know There's several OPOs now that are really thinking very seriously about this concept of separating the family services team into the support and advocacy roles and being a little bit more strategic about how to use that talent based on their unique skill sets. And, while this research that we did, may have been a contributing factor to some of these decisions, we know that there were some organizations that were thinking about this long before we were around. So I know that you guys started this process, some time ago. So I'm curious, like, how did you actually go about facilitating the separation of the team? And, was there a process that you followed? Was the experience what you expected it would be? Like, what was the approach and how did it align to what you thought what it might be?
So we learned quite a few things along the way. And I feel like, as Dominic was explaining, I feel like we maybe flipped the switch and just kind of dove right in. And so far, knock on wood, we're doing well. But to talk about the process of it and kind of how it all came about. So the very first thing, very much what you just said, Iowa Donor Network was kind of already having these conversations about, who are the best folks to be having these conversations, and then pair that with the study that you guys did, and it really kind of reinforced just those things that were already being discussed. So essentially, once the decision had been made, from a high level that, this position would be turned into two, the very first thing was meeting with that team. So for the purposes of this, and I know we all have our acronyms, our team used to be DFAs. We are now ODAs and FAs. So it all makes sense. It's alphabet soup. But essentially, what was the DFA team, what they were met with from a leadership level as a whole, and the information was rolled out. The information from the survey was shared, a bigger conversation about the plans to separate the position into two, and then an explanation of what each role was. So very much explaining that the on-site donation advocate is going to be doing donation conversations and paperwork, and then we're handing over care to our family advocate team, who will then pick it up from there. It was a meeting with the entire team, and they were able to ask questions and, share their responses and everything, and truly just kind of digest it, because that's a lot to have just kind of shared with you. The biggest thing that I think Iowa Donor Network did that was very helpful was they were very intentional with their timeline. They were very clear with the team, this is our decision, and essentially at this point, we want you to think about which role you feel like best suits you, and then let us know. And then there's a deadline for that. And then there was going to be a implementation date kind of already known. So there was a very clear timeline, and we were very, very intentional about sticking with it, even though as the timeline kind of crept up, we were like, oh, that'd be great if we could scooch this. But we were like, nope, we wanted to just be really, transparent with the team of, we said we were going to do it on this timeline, so we're going to stick with that. So essentially, once the team members decided which role they felt like best suited them, we had kind of an interview style conversation with them at a leadership level. It was kind of open conversation. It was very casual. It wasn't like a formal interview. Some team members opted to talk about both roles because they kind of wanted to get a little more input, like, where do you think I land? What are your thoughts? At the end of the day, everybody ended up where they wanted to be. Whatever that initial role was that they felt matched for them is where they ended up. So we didn't feel like anybody was feeling like they got put somewhere they didn't want to be. They all felt pretty comfortable with it. The other thing, as Dominic said, that fear of, are you replacing all of us? We made it really, really clear right out the gate, like, nope, there's a place for everybody. We are definitely not going to be replacing you. Once it all kind of shook out, within that timeline before the final implementation date, there was a lot of conversations, as you can imagine, with those on-site teams, really, really trying to digest that why behind it. I think it was just like a big thing for folks to digest. It's a big change, it's new to us. I mean, obviously it was very new to them. Ultimately, we put our implementation date into effect, and we were really, really intentional about, we're going to start it was November 1st is when we made the decision, like this was our change date, that immediately folks were going to start following the process of what it looks like, even though we weren't fully staffed in either role. We wanted everyone to just learn the process and not create a Band-Aid for being short-staffed to then change it when we were fully staffed. So we were pretty like, let's set up our standard work. Like, how do we want handoff to look? Just those really practical things. And I think all of that paid off because we didn't have to then change things as we hired new people. Just scrolling down with my notes. Some of the things, we had both the teams meet, even though they were kind of the same team. At this point, they were now these separate teams, and we wanted to treat them as separate teams, but we had them meet together in person, and they were responsible for figuring out what does their handoff communication look like. So after the authorization is complete, what does that look like? How are you contacting them? We really wanted them to own that process and just have that buy-in of like, make this smooth, and how do you guys want it to look? So I think that also really helped because they got to own that process and communicate with one another with what works best. Obviously, the other benefit there was both teams have done both roles, so they got to have a really good conversation about what would work the best. So kind of getting into some of the stuff that we didn't expect. There were definitely some reactions that carried over into, that on-site conversation, as we all know how that can go with, feelings about different things. So we definitely had to navigate some of the perceptions on the why behind it. There were definitely some team members who struggled with the change, as all people are, some people like change, most people don't. They definitely, had certain feelings about it. So we just remained really supportive and like, hey, if you need to call me and talk this through, let's do it. But we were also really clear that these decisions had been made. And so kind of that balance of, we're going to move forward with this and how can we support you in that? We had a handful of open spots that we had to fill. The other piece, that we didn't really 100% anticipate was we were no longer going to cross train. So the positions we filled now don't necessarily know the other role. I mean, they know it enough to maybe explain it, but they couldn't necessarily step into it and do it. So in terms of like paperwork, this became an interesting aspect. So our approach team does authorization and paperwork, but our family advocate team does not. So it kind of became a timing thing of, we need to make sure we're doing all the things on the front side that we need to, because we may not have a staff person to go back and do that part of it. So kind of a logistical thing. We didn't really know what to expect in terms of authorization rates, but by December, we were definitely seeing an increase in authorization rates. And so that felt good. That felt like, okay, we're on the right track. And then another thing we weren't 100% expecting was, in the times of high activity, we didn't have this other group that we could reach out to, because we were very clear about making the roles separate and not asking them to cover for one another, since we had just been so intentional about the separation. And I think that kind of, from a process perspective, from start to finish, the best part about it was we gave them the timeline, we gave them the dates and sort of the like quote unquote deadlines for letting us know about their decisions. And I think it just kept the conversation moving. And so we didn't feel like we were treading water in these conversations that weren't going anywhere. It was we're moving forward. We're going to start on this date. Let us know your decisions. So that felt very productive.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just like the change management process, it sounds like you guys did a really great job of involving the team as part of that process and having them own where they want to be and how they want to manage communications, which I think at some level, works to support the whole process. You've got at some level, some commitment from them because they're where they want to be. And now they've kind of figured out how they want to communicate with each other. That said, I mean, I'm sure there was still probably some philosophical resistance or skepticism among the team about this whole change initiative in general. And if things were working pretty well, why are we changing? Why is my job changing? Which is natural, of course, but it also can be a complicating factor to kind of manage all of those side conversations about what's happening. So, how did you guys deal with that aspect of the change?
I mean, yes, all of those things happened. Folks certainly asked exactly what you just said, like what was wrong with what we were doing 6 months ago. So a lot of our conversation always kind of revolves back to that why, the why behind it. And another, I think, something I think is really great about Iowa Donor Network, we're really, really transparent about, our role is to support families through donation. We want to encourage families to move forward with donation because we truly believe that this is a good decision for that family. And we're really transparent with that with our staff too. And so some of that why of, why did we make this change was really explaining that part to the team that, we want to make sure we have the person in front of that family that's going to support them through this part of the conversation, and recognizing and trying to sort of share, support looks different in terms of which part of that process you're in. And in terms of that philosophical question, something that I shared with that on-site donation / approach team is the support you're providing is truly just concentrated in that donation conversation. That's where your support lies, but it doesn't look like the support you provide on day 2 or 3 of the donation process. You are walking them through a really difficult conversation because you are grounded in the fact that this is going to be good for the family. And so it was just changing that way of looking at what support is, because I think, I'm going to bet Dominic agrees, and probably any other family services manager or anybody who is leading that group of people, support is what they absolutely lean on as like, this is what we're doing for families. And you don't necessarily want to take that away because a lot of folks connect with that word, but it's changing what the support looks like. Because it's education, it's advocating, it's nudging when you need to, but it still is ultimately supporting them through this difficult conversation. And so I think it was just a balance of making sure both teams recognized you're still going to be providing really good care to a family. It's just going to look a little different if you're on the approach side.
Yeah. Speaking of education, you talked, you made mention that you're not cross-training anymore. You were very intentional about separating the roles. So what is the impact on the training process? Like what are you doing to ensure that everybody is in a position to be as successful as they can in now their separate roles?
Yeah. So the other piece is that there are folks on the family advocate team who were originally, a DFA, so they naturally sort of have all this other information as well. But new hires are being only trained in their specific role. So that's kind of where we're at right now, since we now have some open positions. So we're officially 6 months out from, the official separation. And I think this is actually the most exciting part. I'm a huge fan of education, as you read my go back for more. But this is the best part, is now we get to develop and create this, just robust training experience for the on-site donation advocates. And we know that folks who are in that role have those skills and traits, to do those really effective donation conversations. And then we know that for our open positions, we're also going to utilize that same kind of measure of like, these are the folks we want in here who do have that influence, trait. We need those. But along with that, what I've learned from this group of people is they're very information hungry. They want to know the best practices. They want to know the best phrases. They want to have all the tools in their toolbox before they have these conversations with families. And so it's this interesting balance of just because you keep having donation conversations with families does not mean you're getting better at it. And that, I think, is something new that we need to pause. We need to kind of dissect everything you just said. What worked, what didn't, what made a family's shoulders go down, what made a family get kind of prickly with you. Those are the pieces where we're at right now. So just we're developing skills days and debriefing. And I absolutely love dissecting every little word that you said when you were with a family. And so we can just figure it out, what did you say? So that's kind of where we're at right now, is we are very much starting to build what I like to call it like a curriculum, because I'm a nerd, but just this deep curriculum of what is the approach conversation? What are you supposed to be saying? What are the, what are those things what are the tells from that family of like, oh, I probably should go this route, or that type of thing.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. That's going to actually lead into our session next month, which is kind of about behavioral flexibility with the FSCs and how they differently manage conversations given those kind of situational cues. So we might have to talk again in preparation. Well, that's really helpful. I appreciate you both sharing, and we've got some questions that have come in for each of you. And I think this one might be an easier go-to question for Robin right off the bat. Just as you mentioned, this absolute separation of the roles. What were there any compensation changes for any of them?
Yes, nobody went down.
Okay. Nobody went down.
Nobody went down. That maybe also created some of the, this is actually something, and we didn't really touch on it too much, and I just want to put a plug in for it. Some of the feedback we got from our clinical coordinators and our hospital services coordinators, they felt concern for our family advocate team that somehow their role was being viewed as less than, just because there seemed to be this big, emphasis on authorization rate. And so we've done a lot. I've met with all those teams within their monthly meetings to ensure, like, absolutely not. Our family advocates are just as important. I mean, gosh, sometimes I'm like, you guys, like, you're there for the days, and so that we had some, feelings around that, but I think we pretty much addressed those.
Good, thank you. And I'll just remind everybody that's in the audience, if you do have questions for Dominic or Robin or both, feel free to use the Q&A area to submit those. I've got one that came in for Dominic, and it says regarding integration, any concerns about how the lead advocate would be determined if I
think we lost your sound.
Yeah, can't hear you. Sorry.
Anthony, I think we lost your audio. I've got the question here. I'll ask it. So regarding integration, any concerns about how the quote unquote lead advocate would be determined if multiple people can potentially have that function as a part of their job? How do they figure out who should take the lead for an approach if both could potentially do it? They're both present or both available to do it. How do the tiebreakers work? I think is another way to ask that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, we haven't got to that point yet. It's something we'll need to figure out. I mean, we're typically sending one of the family support coordinators on site now, and they're often joined by one of the clinical staff. So I wouldn't imagine we're sending two people who are leading or could lead conversations. We would deploy them in a manner that would have one of them on site. Now, for the continuity piece, and I would love to hear how Robin and her team are doing this, but in terms of once you have the conversation and then you're transitioning to support, what does that continuity look like? So I'd want to learn from Robin. Again, we haven't gotten there yet, but certainly something we'll need to consider. But just in practice now, we're only sending one person who typically would lead that conversation. So if somebody else has wants clarification or wants to expand on that, I can address it. But just that's how I would answer that. So Robin, how are you addressing the continuity handoff piece from the conversation piece to the support piece? Are they both there? Is it they come after? Or?
So Iowa also, we're geographically challenged in the hours of nothingness in between hospitals, but that happens. So sometimes it's just a matter of we won't be able to get a family advocate on site before that on-site donation advocate is needed elsewhere. So the process is pretty smooth. The goal is always a warm handoff. We want that ODA to introduce the FA to the family and say, this is your person, and just that warm handoff. If it's later in the evening and family's heading home, we might have that FA call the family and just say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'll meet with you on site tomorrow, warm handoff. But otherwise, yeah, like it's pretty smooth the way that they're able to just transition. We try to just, always give them their name and make sure they know to expect a phone call. So many families text now, so that can make it really easy, just that.
Because certainly at Donor Connect, even going from one family support coordinator to the next, they have concerns about continuity and making sure that the family's seeing the same person. So it's nice to hear that you've had success in different people interacting with the family, and the family's not confused on who's there to help them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, something what, I think we'd all agree with, families only know what we tell them, and, they're likely seeing a different bedside nurse every day, and there's probably a different provider on the unit every day. And so I think it's just that same thing of like, hey, like this person's gonna, like, we usually use the phrase like, this is me for tomorrow, and just kind of hand it over as, we're all on the same page and you'll be in good hands.
I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me now? Okay. I don't know what happened. I just totally lost audio. Thanks for jumping in, Chad. one of the questions that I had for each of you, as you were both describing where you started from in these initiatives, and I know you both are working high performing organizations, and so how do you sell this idea of a major change when you're already high performing? Like, how do the teams go, wait a minute, we're doing great right here. We're, a tier 1 OPO. We've got great donation rates. Like, and now you want to change things. Like, I feel like there might be some resistance to changing a good thing. So how do you sell that? Dom, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think we can all point to the fact that there are 104,000 people on the waiting list who need life-saving transplants, and we're not meeting that need. So that's the easy answer. I think we all know our own data. I think what was really helpful was the DeGarmo project and looking at 30,000 conversations and seeing what authorization rates look like. Now, we're really performing with registered cases in DCD particularly, and we have opportunities in other areas. So we recognize that. So until we're at a place where there's organs that are in the supplies outpacing the demand, I think we all have work to do. But I think we all know our data individually. Now, for me, this was my graduate school work. I've believed in this for many years. I think as an industry, we have thought about things in the same way. We collaborate, we share ideas, and I think that just reinforces more of the same. It wasn't until this project came along, it's like, hey, here's another idea, or here's another way of thinking about it, and here's some data to support it, that it made a lot of us think differently, but it also reinforced, like Robin had said, they were already talking about this. And anecdotally, when Chad and I were having conversations with OPOs, many of them were talking about this. Is there somebody else that should be having conversation, or should we think about recruitment differently? So that all surmises that we can do more, we can do better, and it may be in one area. It may be just in not burning out our staff. It may be, again, deepening our bench and figuring out who can have these conversations. So that's how I'd address it.
What about you, Robin? How'd you sell the concept?
So I think for me, it was maybe easier because Iowa Donor Network is always like continuous improvement is like, I don't even know, it's stamped on us somewhere. Like there's always change, there's always new initiatives. And I think it's just in the culture now that like, we're going to try something new and see how it works out. And if it's good, great. If not, we won't talk about it again. Like, let's just keep moving forward. And this very much kind of fell in line with that, when we were explaining it to the teams, the why behind it. And like I said, being very, very transparent about that, we want to reach more families, exactly what Dominic said. We believe, like I said, donation is good for donor families. So obviously outside of the huge benefit to recipients, we do truly believe that we are serving our community just by offering the opportunity of donation and supporting them through that process. So I think always just leaning into that why behind it, that at the end of the day, this is the best thing for the community. This is the best thing for families, obviously the best thing for recipients. That, kind of gives you that gas you need to get it going.
Yeah. Got an operational question. So for the ODAs and the FAs, what are the shifts like? Are they 12, 24 on call? Like, how is that set up for you guys?
So that's a really good question. So when they were DFAs, everybody was 24 hours. The ODA stayed at 24 hours, and the FAs actually changed to 12 hours. And that was actually just in response to their staffing numbers. After the roles kind of shook out, they were the least staffed. They are going to return back to 24 hours at some point. That's their conversation that they're having. So eventually everyone will return back to that 24/7 coverage. Those middle of the night ORs, they happen. So we need a family support person.
Yeah. Another question that came in, has there been any consideration of dedicated in-house family support advocates for high referral volume hospitals? And if so, how has that gone?
Yeah, I can share. That was the direction we were headed to at Life Center. Again, we had the staffing volume to support that. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think we're starting with dedicated hospital development coordinators in our high volume hospitals here in Utah and Idaho, but that could easily transition into a dedicated family role. I think this is going to be a test for us, and we're going to pilot it out. Certainly, I think every OPO's opportunity is through conversion. I think we all do a fairly consistent job managing. Some may be more aggressive in allocation. Some may have transplant programs that are using the newer technology that allows higher utilization. But presence matters, being available, being able to respond to families and referrals quickly is our opportunity. And especially for OPOs that have large geographical service areas. So again, I think those hybrid models are quite effective. Having dedicated staff whose sole function is to do one thing is a little more challenging. So I'm going to start with a hybrid role and then see, what that does from a volume standpoint to justify a dedicated role.
Robin, any input on this question?
So we do have in the western part of the state, we have 2 team members. They're not an ODA or they're not an FA. They're a DSC. So they're that donor services coordinator, and they essentially do HD and family support conversations. So they're very much that hybrid. They probably do like 4 other jobs as well. Like they run Western Iowa, but we really need them because like it's a 6-hour commute there and back from where I am just to get up there. And so we absolutely need those folks to cover those hospitals. Within the 2 bigger part, the Des Moines area, the University of Iowa area, like we, at this point, knock on wood, we're able to meet the needs with the staff that we have. And if we couldn't physically get on site in time to talk to a family, we would end up just having a phone conversation with them.
So we've got just a couple of minutes left. And as we wrap up, I'm wondering, there's probably some folks on the call today who are curious about your experience because they're thinking about an initiative like this for their organization. Maybe some of the information that you shared was helpful to move them in one direction or the other. But if you had to have kind of one key takeaway, like one of the biggest motivating factor for you or the biggest outcome, the biggest benefit to the decision that you've made in order to push them over the line, what would you say that is? So Dom, what would you say is the most important consideration in terms of being the bench?
Well, I'll start by saying that we heard from Kim and Robin and myself, and I think we have 3 different paths. I mean, certainly Robin and Kim are more aligned than us, but we're all going towards the same thing. And that is that we recognize that there are work styles and attributes that align more closely with a family advocate, and there are some that align better with a donation advocate. So I think we're all going in the same direction, just taking a little bit different paths. So I think the selling point for me, or kind of the reason I think this is important, is we have, as an industry, forced functions into one role, most of us, and are expecting people to be successful in both areas where they may not have the skill sets, the desire, the interest, the ability to do so. And I think the more closely we can align people's roles with their strengths, the better the outcomes. And the better outcomes means more lives saved. So I think that should be self-explanatory, but sometimes we do this in many other roles. Oh, because you're a clinical coordinator, you must be good at allocating organs. And we group functions into roles. And I think we have an opportunity to think differently about this.
What about you, Robin?
Oh, I completely agree with that. A lot of the feedback we got from both the ODA and the FA, once they kind of settled in, we were like, how's it going? What are your thoughts? And the ODAs overwhelmingly were like, we can focus on this donation conversation. We're not worried about running over to do, a family support thing here and there. And it's not that because they miss it, they do like that part of the job, but it allowed them to just be present for the role that they were there for. And then the same thing with that family advocate role. They were like, we can truly sit here with this family and give them the attention and time and support that they need. And so I think there's been some bumps in the road and the philosophical questions, but overwhelmingly the feedback has been really positive about what it has allowed them to do with their work when they're on site and just that work-life balance. they just have a better idea of what their day is going to look like, especially for like the team that preferred, to go on site to do approaches. Those are not usually long hours on site. Those are relatively short, times on site. And so I think job satisfaction, absolutely.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you both for your time and all of the information that you shared with the group today. We really do appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who attended. Again, if you have a need for an on-demand link for any of your staff members to be able to hear this, just reach out to Chad or myself, and we'll put you in the right position to get that. And we'll be reaching out soon regarding our family service coordinator forum for next month. We talked about kind of behavioral flexibility and code switching, and so that'll be the next topic. So again, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks again to Robin and Dominic for sharing this all. Thank you.